Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth session in American English Live Series 16. We're so excited that each of you are here with us today. My name is Kate, and I'll be with you today along with my colleague behind the scenes, Heather, who will be the moderator, helping answer your questions and responding to your comments during the session. Let's begin today with these wonderful audience comments from our most recent webinar, Promoting Authentic Language Use with Tasks with Ling Feng. So Adnan in Pakistan wrote, just love the session. Some very useful insights on promoting authentic language use. I would love to adapt them to my setting. Thanks a ton. And Anjali in the Philippines wrote, thank you for this wonderful webinar. I learned a lot that I can apply in class. I will be more intentional when planning and administering tasks for my students. Georgeta in Romania wrote, clear and concise ideas and explanation and practical activities to use in class. It was an hour of my time well spent. Thanks. So we love to see our teacher participants actively engaged in professional development. So please continue to share your thoughts about our webinars by offering feedback through the end of session quiz form or by emailing them to americanenglishwebinars@fhi360.org. We may feature one of your comments during the next session. So here's a little bit about throughout Series 16, we are exploring the themes of teaching about climate change in the EFL classroom and approaches for teaching a variety of core ELT topics. We hope you are able to use the practical ideas we share. If you are eagerly awaiting one of these sessions or you really loved another one, please let us know in the chat. So here's what to expect today. The session is about 60 minutes long. The presenter will present the material, and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments too. But we really hope to hear from you, our audience, so that we can address all your ideas and experiences. Please share your thoughts using the comments feature or chat box. And when our session comes to a close, you will have an opportunity to receive a digital badge for your participation. At the end of the webinar, we'll share a link in the comments. Click on that link and complete a short quiz about today's session. You must answer 2 out of 3 multiple choice questions correctly. Once you've successfully passed the quiz, you can expect to get your badge via email within about a week. And before we begin, we want to remind everyone about the upcoming time change here in the United States. Daylight savings time starts on March 12th, and we'll set our clocks forward 1 hour in the US. This means that the final 2 Series 16 webinars will take place at 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, which may be 1 hour later in your local time zone. You can confirm your local start time for AE Live 16.5 and 16.6 using the link shown on the slide and being shared by the moderator now. Please enter the dates March 15th and March 29th when using the time zone converter, because we don't want you to miss our last 2 wonderful sessions. So now for today's webinar, the line between questions, responses, and critical reading. This session will introduce the question-answer relationship framework for building readers' confidence in locating specific information in a text, or turning readers' confidence in locating specific information in a text, or turning to themselves to answer questions that require thinking about the text. After a brief review of research on how building reading strategies can also enhance students' reading comprehension, participants will use an anchor text, Stephen Crane's The Open Boat, to explore 4 QAR question categories, as well as steps for applying this approach in classrooms. QAR can achieve more than orienting our students to the range of questions that might be asked of a text. It champions the notion that question making and responding is our shared right and responsibility. Skills developed through the QAR framework are especially relevant to the media literacy requirements of today's complex information landscape. And now we're pleased to introduce our presenter, Dr. Spencer Salas. Spencer Salas is a professor in the Department of Middle, Secondary, and K-12 Education at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, where he leads the PhD in Curriculum and Instruction Urban Literacies TESOL sub-concentration. Among the courses he teaches are globalization and teacher leadership. He's been a Fulbright Fellow to Romania, Guatemala, and South Africa, and a frequent U.S. Department of State English language specialist. He is co-editor of Vygotsky in 21st Century Society, U.S. Latinos and Education Policy, Education in the New Latino South, and the TESOL Encyclopedia of English Language Teaching, first edition. Wow, welcome, Spencer. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, Kate, and thanks for that lovely introduction. And I'd like to begin by thanking the whole team that spent so many hours preparing this webinar. That includes Heather, Ilana, Brooke, Kara. So I'm so grateful for your collaboration. And of course, I want to recognize the U.S. Department of State's Office of English Language Programs for sponsoring the webinar series and for all the work they do to bring teachers together. And most of all, I want to thank you teachers for joining me this March 1st. I'm so excited. Well, the title of the session is The Line Between Question Responses and Critical Reading. And I think that title will make more sense to you as we move through the webinar. But I want to just build off a little bit on what Kate said. I'm connecting to you from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And it's a very large public institution with an enrollment of approximately 30,000 students. So you can see the map of the United States, and the star is Washington, D.C. on the right, on the East Coast. And below it, there's a purple state. That's Virginia. And then it's North Carolina, we're yellow, right? And Charlotte's in the western corner of North Carolina, almost at the border of South Carolina. So anyhow, Charlotte's a growing metropolitan area. Right now, we have about 2 million. And we're just so excited to be here today. And my work specifically at the Cato College of Education with my colleagues is to prepare K through 12 teachers for the state of North Carolina and for the nation. So let's just jump right in and look at our agenda for today. To start, I want us to think about great books and why we include literature in our secondary level curriculum. Here we say high school. But when I say high school, secondary, I mean them interchangeably, and we're talking about adolescence. Why is it that we read literature with adolescents when we're learning a foreign language? That'll take us to the question-answer relationship QAR framework, and we'll walk through that framework. And then what I want to do with you is to apply the question-answer relationship framework to the opening paragraphs of a classic American short story, The Open Boat by Stephen Crane. So we're going to take a piece of literature, apply QAR to that piece of literature, and then to conclude, I want us to think about why and how we'd want to apply QAR in our classrooms, and what are the implications at the community level. Okay. Well, teachers love reading, I think, at least English teachers do. And I have to say that as much as TESOL has evolved over the years, there's one thing that's constant, and that is when you reach a level of proficiency where you can access a text in its original form, or a piece of great literature in its original, that's really an achievement, right? And that's something that we work towards, especially the secondary level. Well, one of the reasons besides it's just a long-standing tradition, is that great books are part of our shared world heritage, right? We're proud of our authors, our poets, our playwrights, our songwriters. They're national heroes who transcend borders and time and space. And I know, for example, when Toni Morrison won the Nobel Prize in 1993, she was the first Black American woman to ever win the prize. I felt so proud, and I quickly, got a hold of her books and began reading Toni Morrison. But we're teachers, right? So let's just get started and think together. What's a piece of literature that's inspired you? What's a great book that's inspired you, that you're proud of, that you like your students to read and to know? What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, let us know, everybody. We'd love to hear about a piece of literature that has inspired you or that you're proud of, or that you'd like your students to read and know. Fernando has a great one, Brave New World. Awesome. Also a nice comment from you, Fernando, about how reading is amazing. We as teachers tend to agree.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Great. What are some other works that you would love your students to know, or that you're inspired by or proud of? Yeah, Daniela says Shakespeare's plays like Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh, wow.
Jules Verne's books, Little Women. I love Little Women. Gone with the Wind from Lulia. Ray Bradbury short stories from I Am. The Old Man and the Sea from Francis. Angie says Edgar Allan Poe. The Romantic Period writers from Angie. Another one for Old Man and the Sea. Very nice. Moby Dick from Fernando. Lots of readers, as you. Let's see. 40 Rules of Love by Falak Shafak. Very cool. The Road Not Taken and Other Short Stories. Ray Bradbury. Wonderful. White Fang. That's a great one. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for sharing these.
Well, it sounds like we're all a bunch of readers, right? But here's the thing. When we think about the literature curriculum and adolescent readers, as much as we might love reading, it's certainly true that many teens and young adults, especially boys, struggle with studying literature for many reasons. And one of the issues, I think, or one of the realities, is that in secondary school, we make a shift from teaching reading to teaching literature. And what I mean by that is there's a certain assumption that everybody can read when they get into high school, and they're proficient readers and they have strategies and tools and experience. So we no longer teach, let's say, comprehension strategies as explicitly, at least, as we do in the primary grades. We focus on the text themselves, the ideas, and their historical context, let's say. But for some students, the classics seem too old to be relevant. And I can tell you, I was talking with my son, Abel, the other week, and I said, "Oh, Abel, have you read this book by Stephen Crane?" He said, "Dad, I don't read anything that's older than me." And he's just 21, right? So it was a joke, but not really, right? So that's certainly true, is that sometimes the connection to our lives is not obvious. That's something we have to learn to do, is to make connections with a text. And also, I have to say that by the time a student's a teenager and is in secondary school, they've been labeled or have labeled themselves as either good or bad readers, right? Like, I'm a good reader, I love reading, or I'm a bad reader, I don't like reading. So that's unfortunate, right? And the truth is, reading is complicated, right? And we have to do many things at once. We have to generate meanings around words and messages across sentences. We have to use relevant background knowledge, identify textual and rhetorical structures. We have to infer, predict, and connect. And that's even more complicated when we're approaching a text that's considered a classic in a school setting, because there's that pressure. It's like, oh, this is hard, it's a classic. I'm not a good enough reader to understand it, right? But it doesn't have to be that way, I think. And I think that you agree. So here's a question for you, another question in terms of, oh, well, let me go back and talk a little bit more about struggling readers. So struggling readers who struggle to make sense of text are likely to struggle throughout their education, and they might give up on themselves as readers. So they're unaware of the strategies that can help them understand what a writer is trying to say. But again, it doesn't have to be that way. So my question to you is, what strategies do you access when you take up a difficult text that you're struggling with, or that, is, let's say, intimidating?
Yeah, great question. What do you do, everyone, when you are trying to help your students make sense of a difficult text, or when you are trying to make sense of a difficult text? What is something that you do to help yourself or to help your students? What do you think, everybody? I know I might read part of, like, a description of the book to give myself a little bit of context. That's something that I often do. Salvador says he looks for specific information. Jenny says she activates background knowledge, introducing the topic first. Great. I might also look at the pictures and try to make a guess as to what it's about. Chunking text from Jasam. Repeating the words that I don't understand from Leslie. Addressing the question, what is this text about? That's a great one. A lot of people saying background knowledge or scaffolding. Restating difficult sentences or passages in their own words. That's a great strategy. And maybe providing synonyms and vocabulary. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone.
That's for sure. So we use all kinds of strategies to access difficult text, and we're always looking for more, right? So I, for one, have collaborated extensively around adolescence engagement with literature with my colleagues here at UNC Charlotte, with Beth Murray in theater education. We've done some work looking at how to bring text to life through voice, sound, and movement. With my reading education colleagues, Marion Mraz, right? Brian Williams, Susan Green. We've looked at how we can make reading-based vocabulary instruction more student-centered. But I really hadn't heard of QAR until a couple of years ago. And it was Marion Mraz, who's a literacy education professor here, works with young children and teens, who introduced it to me. Well, it's been around for a long time. It's called the question-answer relationship, and it was Taffy Raphael who developed it back in as early as 1984. And the whole idea behind QAR is that once students have a baseline understanding of a text, so you don't begin with QAR, you end with QAR, and we'll get into the specifics of it. But once they've read the text, they've developed a certain level of confidence with the text. We can use this approach, question-answer relationship, to check for and to grow comprehension. So like I said, QAR has been an important tool for U.S. primary K through 12 teachers, but widely unknown in the TESOL community of practice. And there are reasons for that. I'd say historically, TESOL's been located in College of Arts and Sciences in a Department of English or Department of Linguistics, right? And then on the other side of campus, you have the College of Education, where we do things that are more related to reading comprehension, literacy. So it's only recent, and there's not always a lot of communication between the different colleges and colleagues. But more recently, we've seen TESOL, at least in the United States, and here at my institution, we've seen TESOL, departments of TESOL migrate into colleges of education. And so we're looking more closely at these literacy education strategies that K through 5 teachers especially have been using for many, many years, and seeing how can I make use of them to in my own context. So that's what I'd like to propose that we look at today. So the idea behind QAR is that not all questions are created equal, and the response that you generate or how you generate a response depends on the question that's being asked. So specifically, QAR breaks down question or articulates 4 question types that require readers to respond at different levels of conceptual ability. So at a literal level, some questions, so we've read the text and then the teacher's asking questions. Some of those questions simply ask readers to read the lines. It's in the text, it's right there in front of you. Let's find the answer. Other questions that you might propose to your students after you read the text are really asking readers to read between the lines. Here, what we mean is, as a reader, I'm focusing both on what the author says and what the author doesn't say, and what the author means or is implying. So the answers are not stated explicitly in the text when we're reading between the lines. And yet other questions ask us to read beyond the lines, to evaluate, to make connections, and to think critically about how the text connects to our own experience. So that's basically the concept of QAR. Here's a graphic where you can see the 4 QAR question types in the text right there. In the text, think and search. So those first 2 are more what we call literal comprehension. It's in the lines. Author and me, this is between the lines, and on my own, beyond the lines. All right, so that's QAR, 4 question types. And we explain to students, look, these are 4 common question types, and let's try practicing them out. So to do so, I'd like to, well, I'm going to use The Open Boat by Stephen Crane. So how would we get started with QAR? So again, select a short text and don't begin with the text with QAR, you finish with it. So first you work through the text and you build up background knowledge, just like you were all saying, develop vocabulary, work through the complexity of the syntax, make sure the students understand the plot, the characters, who's who, what's happening. And then once they're confident with the text, now we're going to check their comprehension using the QAR question types. I want to emphasize that QAR isn't a pre-reading strategy, it's a post-reading strategy. All right, so let's select, so talking about selecting a text, the one I'd like us to work with today is by Stephen Crane. And he's an American author, 1871 to 1900. And he's most known for The Red Badge of Courage. And I chose Stephen Crane. Actually, I did this and I forgot to give a shout out to my colleagues in Bahrain, at Bahrain Teachers College and at Nasser Vocational Training Center, because we actually did this together last summer and we worked off a Stephen Crane short story because it's available via the American English website. So you can access The Open Boat and in fact, a whole collection of Stephen Crane stories via the website and share them with your students. Well, Stephen Crane's best known for The Red Badge of Courage. And it's a really moving story. It takes place during the American Civil War, which was very brutal. And a young soldier of the Union Army of the North runs away from the battlefield. And he's overcome with shame. And that's what the story is about, how he grapples with that shame, with his cowardice, right? So we read Stephen Crane, and we've read Stephen Crane in secondary school for decades. My dad just turned 91, and he read it on the island of Guam in 1948, right? So Stephen Crane's an important author. And the story that we're going to look at today and use as an anchor text for QAR is called The Open Boat. So when we say open boat, what we mean by this is it's in the context of the story, it's the four men are on the big boat sinks, and they're in a little lifeboat, a wooden one, and it's not protected. So they're exposed to the wind, the sun, the water. And it's based on a true story, something that happened to Stephen Crane. He was lost at sea off Florida's Atlantic coast. He was on the Commodore, a larger vessel. It sunk, and he was in an open boat for a couple days. And here you can see Florida. There's another map, and there's Florida at the bottom on the East Coast. And, when we think of Florida, oh, Miami Beach, nice weather, beautiful ocean. But actually, the North Florida coast is very treacherous. There's a lot of currents, especially in the wintertime. The surf is really heavy. And it's dangerous and scary. So that inspired The Open Boat. And now I'd like to summarize the story before we even begin reading it, right? And using QAR. So the story opens, it's just a few pages long. Four men are drifting at sea in a little boat, an open boat, little wooden boat about the size of a bathtub. And it's wintertime, they can see the shore. Sometimes the waves lift up the boat. Far, far away, they can see the shore, the lighthouse, but it's about 20 miles away. It's too far to swim. The water's icy. And one of them is hurt. The captain's actually injured. So they're waiting on the boat. They're not sure what they should do. Should we wait for help to come? Should we try swimming for it? But the captain's wounded. What are we going to do? And finally, they realize nobody's going to come to help them. And so they steer the boat as close to shore as they can get, and they dive into the rough surf and catch a wave in a desperate attempt to swim to land. Well, of the four, three men survive, but Billy washes up dead on the beach, a quiet and wet shape. So it's a sad story, right? And one that makes us think a lot about the force of nature and human solidarity and risk-taking and whatnot. Okay, so now let's use QAR and superimpose it on The Open Boat. Let's start with, remember the first question type, it's in the text right there. So I'm going to read this, and here's the question, and I want you to find right there, where is the answer? Okay, so the question is, what color were the waves rocking the boat? All right, here we go. None of them knew the color of the sky. Their eyes glanced level and remained upon the waves that swept toward them. The waves were gray, except for the tops, which were white. And all the men knew the colors of the sea. The line between sky and water narrowed and widened and fell and rose. So it's right there in the text. What do you say, guys? What do you think?
What do you think, everybody? What color were the waves rocking the small boat? And what a beautiful passage. What a beautiful writer he was. The waves were gray, says Daniela. Juana says gray. Arif says gray and white. Riegna C says gray and white. A lot of people saying gray and white.
Yeah, and here we can find it to double check. I mean, it's kind of a trick question, right? Because it says, what color were the waves? Well, blue, right? Because water's blue. Well, they're not blue. We have to look real carefully. And the question sort of implies, oh, there's a single color. But here, if we look at the text, the waves were gray, except for the tops, which were white. So gray and white. It's in the text right there. All right, good job, everybody. So that's what we call in the text right there. And to recap, these types of questions require literal comprehension. There's a single answer and it's located in the text, and you can just jump in and start scanning and searching, right? We're going to find this, and there's just going to be one answer, okay? So that's in the text right there. Well, another type of question that asks us to read the lines, it's called in the text think and search questions. So these are also asking us to read the lines, and the idea is to reinforce literal comprehension. So the answer is in the text, but to respond, the readers have to be a little more patient, go a little more slowly, and assemble information across different parts of the text. It's not all in the same phrase, right? It might not even be in the same paragraph. This kind of question makes us slow down and search the passage. Sometimes we might have to search the entire short story or a longer passage, right? So how about if we try one? So here's a passage. This is like page 2 of the story. And in the text think and search question is, who is in the boat? Who is in the boat? So let's read it and see if we can find out. The cook sat in the bottom and looked with both eyes at the 6 inches of boat which separated him from the ocean. He had bared his fat arms as he worked to empty the water from the boat. The oiler, guiding with one of the 2 oars in the boat, sometimes raised himself suddenly to keep away from the water that poured in. It was a thin little oar, and it often seemed ready to break. The correspondent, pulling at the other oar, watched the waves and wondered why he was there. The hurt captain, lying in the front, was feeling defeat and despair. So we actually have to read through and see who's in the boat. What do you think?
Yep, I see a lot of answers coming in. I think we've got some correct answers here. It looks like we have the cook, the oiler, the correspondent, and the captain. So a lot of people writing in with that response. It looks like there were 4 people on this tiny boat. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's in the text. It's in the lines, but we have to think and search. Now, what makes this a little bit challenging too is the vocabulary, right? What's an oiler, for goodness sakes? I had never heard that. I know what oil is, like you put oil in your car. So what I suspect as a reader is the oiler is some sort of mechanic, right? Maybe that's an old-fashioned word for a ship's engineer. The correspondent, okay, it's some sort of journalist. So Stephen Crane was actually a journalist, a correspondent, right? And so they're using a more antiquated word. But we can see that a repeated structure, the cook, comma, the oiler, comma, the correspondent, comma, the hurt captain, comma. So that also helps us to identify that the author is introducing one of another character. It's the same parallel structure. So there's the answer right there. It's in the text, but we had to think and search. And to recap, in the text, think and search questions, it's something that the reader is going to put together from bits and pieces of the text. So the response wasn't in a single line. It was spread out over a couple pages. Who's in the boat? So it requires us to slow down, and we're going to read through slowly And then we might even have to read further down the road to make sure there's nobody on the boat that we might have missed that let's say the author introduces later on in the story. All right, so these are the first two types of QAR questions in the text, or we could also think of it as in the lines. These are asking us to read in the lines closely to respond. So again, this is something you do after they understood the text and you're checking their literal comprehension. But there are other kinds of questions we can ask that are more challenging cognitively and linguistically. Some of the questions that QAR proposes ask us to read between and beyond the lines. So the first two QAR question types support, like we said, literal comprehension, understanding what the author has explicitly stated in the text. The final two QAR question types support and build skills for reading between the lines, reading beyond the lines. So it becomes more interpretive, more personal. It will require more language to respond coherently, and more thinking, the more cognitively demanding. Okay, let's try one. So let's try an author and me question. These questions ask readers to think about the text and about themselves and to use background knowledge to support comprehension. So with the author and me and on my own, the last two question types, there are many possible answers. With the first two question types in the text, right there in the text, think and search, they're closed answers. That there's really only one response possible for either question type. But here you're going to have different opinions, different ideas, and the author and me questions require students to make a judgment or to formulate an opinion in relation to the text. So we begin speaking in our heads with the author, with the characters. It becomes more of a dialogue, right? And you're going to make a judgment or formulate an opinion. Let's try one out together. So here's your turn, an author and me question. In the open boat, the four men had to decide, to weigh the risk of waiting in the boat for help to come versus swimming to shore. Do you think the four men make the right decision to swim to shore? Why? Why not? Okay, let's see what you think.
Yeah, let us know, everybody. What do you think? Do you think that the four men made the right decision to swim to shore? And please let us know the reason for your answer, the why or the why not. We would love to hear your ideas about this a little more open-ended question of the author and me type of question. What do you think, everyone? Did they make the right decision? Must have been a very difficult decision for those characters to make, that's for sure. Let's see. All right, Blanca says yes, because if they had waited, all of them probably would have died. Interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah says yes, it was a good decision made by four men to wait in the boat for help to come. So maybe they should have waited a little longer. They probably had more chances to survive if they attempted to swim to the shore. So Karen says yes, that was the correct idea. Let's see. Arif says they made the right decision. Waiting makes things worse. And Gunai says it was an impossible situation. So I suppose no, maybe they didn't make the right decision. And Karina says yes, because they had more chance of survival by swimming to the shore. Great ideas, everyone. Thank you for sharing.
Oh boy, it's really hard to put yourself, I mean, to think about the characters and why they made that decision and what you would have done. So it becomes a conversation. And here, like Kate was saying, you just don't want to say yes, they made the right decision or no. The idea is that the question is going to generate a longer response. And again, there's going to be some sort of reference back to the text. Like here, in one response, the participant is saying, I don't think it was a good idea since the water was icy. So see, that's a direct reference to the text. We're speaking to the text. And I think for the hurt captain, that was a really difficult decision to make because, he was bleeding. His leg was broken, could hardly move. So what was the chance of him surviving? But what's ironic or, sad, at least in the context of the story, is the strong one, Billy, the oiler, he's the one that doesn't make it. And so what is that? What is the author trying to say about the force of nature, right? Versus the force of man. It's really interesting and makes us think a lot, right? So to recap, when we're doing an author and me question, we're asking the reader to engage in mental dialogue with the reading. There isn't one correct answer, although students might want to debate it and argue through it. But I think that as the teacher, we have to recognize, well, as we read between the lines, different people will have different opinions based on their lived experiences. So we're going to hear and receive those different points of view. And again, we're not reading in the lines, we're reading between the lines. It's requiring more interpretation, judgment. All right, so finally, on my own questions. So we had the first in the text, right there in the text, think and search, in the text, author and me, and now on my own. So on my own questions, ask readers to move beyond the lines into their own lives, feelings, dreams, and worlds. And these responses are really going to vary, right? So here's a question for you. This is based on the open boat. It's about being lost at sea. So to be lost at sea, to say I feel lost at sea or I'm lost at sea, it's an idiomatic expression, is I feel isolated. I'm frightened. I'm worried. I don't have a direction. Sort of, I'm like this little tiny fragile boat in the middle of the ocean. I don't know what's going to happen to me. So have you ever felt that way? And when have you felt lost at sea? What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And this short story really illustrates that feeling very well that many of us have had, even if we haven't been in the exact situation that he's describing in this story. So what do you think, everyone? Have you ever felt lost at sea? And I will go ahead and start. We were talking about this earlier. I definitely felt lost at sea during the pandemic, especially those first few months when we didn't know what we were supposed to do or where we were supposed to go or who we could see, and trying to stay isolated. And it was a difficult time for me, and I think for many people. So that is a time I felt lost at sea. How about you, everyone? Excuse me. Angela says when her dad got sick and the doctors announced a bad diagnosis. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yes, that would be very difficult. Oh yes, Juana is also sharing a difficult situation. Thank you for sharing how difficult. I felt lost at sea when I didn't know where to start my thesis. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
That's a tricky one. Martha also said she felt that way during the pandemic. Saw says when he lost his mom. Yeah, very sad. When I joined a webinar in the middle, That's a great one. Yes, you say, wow, what's happening here? Yep. That's why you need to check your time, everyone, before the next two. Um, yes, and let's see when it, oh yeah, lots of sad stories being shared, and we appreciate it. Losing family members, difficulty at work, failing exams, feeling embarrassed. So we appreciate your honesty and sharing all of that, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that courageous sharing. It's really deep. I mean, this sort of question can get very, very deep and personal. And so I think it's really important when you ask this kind of question, not to insist. Wait for volunteers who's comfortable sharing. Maybe they can't share at that moment. But I think in the end, that's what literature can do, right? Great literature can do is to take us outside of that text and to be beyond the text and to begin thinking about our own lives and the world we live in and our place in it and our dreams for it that's the glory of literature, right? I think that's why we read. So let's recap the 4 question types. Well, first, let's recap the author and me. Like I said, these questions can be quite personal, and there's no clear or definitive response, right? It's really based on who you are and what you've experienced. And these kind of questions take us beyond the lines. So in the lines, between the lines, and beyond the lines. So let's look at the 4 QAR question types again. In the lines, write their questions, think and search questions. So to answer these, we'll skim, scan, identify, locate, name, sequence, that sort of thing. It's a closed question. There's not the possibility of multiple responses. It's either right in the text, you can find it quickly, or you have to think and search and slow down. Author and me questions are between the lines. It's a dialogue with the text, with the author, with the characters. We interpret, predict, infer, analyze, and critique. And on my own questions take us, as we just saw, beyond the lines. We connect, relate, justify, analyze, argue, evaluate, share, wonder. So this is QAR in a nutshell. And so now let's think a little bit together about which of these types of questions do you think your students would be most excited to answer. So let's say you read the text and now you've developed different questions using the QAR categories. Which of these questions you think they're going to like answering most?
Yeah, let us know, everyone. Which of these 4 question types would your students be most excited to answer? What do you think? Let's see. Fernando says maybe the on my own because it makes a personal connection with the text and gives you a chance to be part of the text. Great. Fernando says on my own as well. So does Karina. Victor says in the text questions would be most exciting for his students. Great. Angela says all of them if taken gradually. I think that's a really nice way to put it. Great way, great thought there. Reingerus says depends on the kind of students. For the advanced ones, they like the on my own question. And in the text right there for other people. So it sounds like all the different types of questions are things that students might like to answer.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, there's something fun about in the text right there questions, finding it right away. Who can find it first, right? And there's something reassuring about the certainty that either you have it right or wrong within the text. But then author and me and on my own questions, I think really take us to a higher plane of thinking. And that's exciting too, right? So what I'd say is, or what QAR encourages us is, don't favor only one question type. Use all, just like you said, use all of the question types and gradually go from in the text to in the lines, between the lines, beyond the lines. And as they gain confidence, they'll become more and more excited about these types of questions. So let's look at the practical level. How would you do this in your secondary classroom? Excuse me. Well, I'd say, again, start with a text that you've studied, that's familiar, that they already have a comfortable understanding of the story and the characters and the language. And then present the 4 question types and 4 sample questions. And then you'd model out loud, okay, once we recognize the question type, what do I do next? So what color were the waves, right? So color, they're asking for really just something very specific in the text. Let me look through the text, color, 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 color. Oh, there's the answer. Or who was in the boat? I think that's in the text. I'm going to find the answer in the text. So let me scan the text slowly. Okay, here's one character, the correspondent, the oiler, and whatnot. The other 2 question types, I think you can also model aloud and begin that dialogue with the author, or you'd model that sort of very personal sharing. All right, so once you've done that, and once they become more and more comfortable and able to recognize the 4 different question types with the same text, have students create their own questions. So put them into groups and have each group develop a question for each of the categories, and then share them, put them all on the board, and then we'll try them out with the class. So the best way to see what kind of the question it is to try to answer it, right? So take one question at a time, share it with the class, see if we can answer it. What does it require us to do to answer the question? And then we know the question type. And maybe we have to adjust the question type or adjust the question so it fits into the right category. But we provide that feedback, and especially with author and me and on my own questions, we want, again, to celebrate the possibility of multiple answers. And then once you've done that, try QAR with another text that you've studied. Okay. I'd like to say that QAR was first developed for the primary grades, but as we've illustrated today, we can use it with secondary level text. And in fact, teachers use it across grade levels and across content areas in the primary grades here in the United States. So it's not exclusive to literature, but you could use it for the literature curriculum. And I think it's a neat thing to try out. But it's not going to resolve or suddenly raise the reading comprehension level of our students in and of itself. It's one of the many strategies we can teach our students to become better readers, right? So it's no longer an issue of I'm a good reader, I'm a bad reader, but I'm becoming a better reader. And so here's a strategy that I'm going to use to become even better at reading comprehension. So to recap what we've done today with the open boat as an anchor text with this beautiful moving short story by Stephen Crane, we use the question-answer relationship framework to explore 4 distinct question types. So understanding the question type, this is what QAR posits, is that by understanding the question types, readers can respond with more confidence. They learn to look in the lines, between the lines, and beyond the lines for different sorts of questions. And I also would say that QAR, one of the benefits, and this is something we discussed when we did the workshops in Bahrain, it can reduce testing anxiety, right? Because students are more confident when they read a difficult text and then they receive some sort of exam based on the text, that they can begin to recognize the question types that the teacher or the examiner is asking them, and they'll know how to where to go and what to do to construct a response, right? To construct an answer. But even more, thinking about QAR beyond the classroom, I'd like to say that, you know, it's true in schools, students may hesitate to ask questions, or they don't have, maybe they don't think they have the authority or knowledge to respond to questions, especially about literature, right? Or they may think that only one answer is possible and that the teacher's answer is the only right answer. And so what QAR does is it makes us better question makers, more confident in our ability to respond, and much more tolerant of the range of responses that our lived experiences inform. So I think that one of the reasons we should do QAR is that it's really a rehearsal for participation in civil society, when questions and questioning are so important. So when we enter a story such as Cranes, we start asking questions, first about words, syntax, and narrative. And we can all agree that the waves off the Florida coast, as Crane described, were gray, except for the tops, which were white. But what the Crane story means to each of us depends on who we are and who we are still becoming as individuals, as readers, as communities. And so that's reason enough to keep reading, to keep asking questions, and to keep looking for answers. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And in the near future, in the English Teaching Forum, you'll see the manuscript version of this webinar that I co-authored with my colleagues here at UNC Charlotte, Miriam Moraz, Susan Green, and Brian Williams. So thank you, Kate, and thanks to all of you. Here's another page of references in case you want to learn more about QAR and its origins. All right. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Spencer. We all can't wait to see your article in Forum. That will be great. So stay tuned, everyone, for one of the upcoming issues of Forum, and take a look at that wonderful article. Really quickly, we have some really nice comments from the audience. Sarat says, I'm happy to learn QAR today. My students will know more now. This will really help my students to understand things more effectively. Wonderful. And Materna says, I love these strategies. They are awesome. And the presentation, fabulous. And Fernando says, this QAR model is really nice. It sparks creativity and curiosity. It makes the reading experience much more interesting and meaningful. And two more about how great literature is based on ideas that are startling, unexpected, unusual, weighty, or new. That was from Lulia earlier in the webinar. It was nice to be reminded of some great literature. And Sarat also says, in the lines is a beautiful phrase. And I think we all agree. So thank you so much to our participants for your wonderful engagement and participation today. And thank you, Spencer, for exploring the QAR model with our audience. We appreciate the reading strategies development approach, and the idea that with support and practice, anyone can be a successful reader.